Hey everyone, in this video we're going to be creating our very first app in a very simple way using very simple code and avoiding completely the boilerplate code that's generated by the Flutter create command. So this is how I personally create my own apps. Basically branching off of what we've learned for the basic Dart, like what functions are, classes are, we're going to be using that knowledge and going to be starting to work with actual Flutter widgets. So a widget in Flutter is basically a chunk of code that displays something on the screen, or it may not display something on the screen. It might be doing something in the background, but a widget is basically an atomic bit of code in our Flutter app that kind of separates logically components of the app. So typically though, a widget is something like a button or an image or text. So that's like 90% of the widgets out there are going to display something. But for the stuff that's just not displaying anything, it can also be a widget. And you'll see that in this lesson. So last time we had this main function, and we went over the fact that when a Flutter app starts, there's this main.dart file that Flutter finds, and then it looks for a function in that file called main as well, and it runs whatever's in that function. Now, to run your own app, we're going to have to kind of use the components that are offered by the Flutter SDK. And that library is called Material. It's short for Material Design. So Material can work for iOS, Android, etc., but it's going to be a file called actually material.dart, and that's located in the Flutter SDK that you downloaded. So to use that, we're going to have to import it. So this is one concept that you're going to have to know about is whenever you want to use some code provided by someone else or even your own code in your own project, you're going to have to use a special command called import. This is a special keyword that the compiler knows about when you want to import some code. So we're going to say import, and it's always going to be at the top of the file. You're going to say import, and then we're going to import something called a package. There's many different packages in Flutter that you can use, and whenever you do import a package, you're going to have package : if you're importing just some code of your own and it's not really a package, you're not going to really need to use package : but typically for Flutter, you're going to have to use this package : and then the path to the file. So in the Flutter SDK, we have a Flutter directory, and then we have / and then material.dart. And then, of course, as we went over, everything has to end with a semicolon. That's basically saying you're ending your statement, you're ending your line of code. So a statement in Dart code is a single unit of work, and it has to end with a semicolon. So let's go ahead and use material.dart. So the first widget we're going to cover, this is the very first widget, and it's the most important widget. It's a widget that we need to use to kind of encapsulate and run our entire app, and that's called MaterialApp. The MaterialApp widget is one of many kind of like container widgets that you can use, but it's the most popular one. And MaterialApp will offer special configuration options or parameters. And remember, parameters are something that you pass into a function that lets us easily customize our app. And the main kind of parameter it provides is something that lets us specify what we want to display as our default starter screen in our app. And that parameter is called home. So every app has a home, right? It's a starting screen. So that's the parameter it's going to provide. So let's go ahead and implement that. So we're going to use a kind of a widget. Now that we imported the material design package here, to use a widget is essentially a class. It's you're using a class, and we went over that in the last lesson, what a class is. So whenever we want to instantiate a class, i.e., if the class is kind of like a template, we're creating an instance of the class, meaning something that we can customize, right? And we did also go over that in last lesson. We say the class name, MaterialApp, and that's the name of that MaterialApp widget. So again, a widget is essentially a class. And we're going to have to use parentheses here. And anything inside these parentheses are the optional parameters we're going to provide. Some classes require specific parameters to be set. and this widget does. But other classes or widgets may not require any parameters, so you're not going to put anything in here. So these are the parameters that we have to provide. And you can read the documentation to see what parameters you might need. Or you can do something which is hold Command, or if you're on Windows, Control, and click on the class. If you want to hover over it, it'll tell you the definition of the class. But if you click into it, it'll show you a lot of probably ugly code, because it's ugly because you probably don't understand it yet, and nor should you look at this yet because it's a bit overwhelming. But later on, you can actually look at this and see what are the configuration options you have for a given widget. So let me just go back here. So basically, just understand that like there's a parameter for MaterialApp called home, and we're going to provide some data to this home parameter. So to basically, the reason why it's skipping down a line here is that because I installed a Flutter extension for Visual Studio Code, it's going to automatically format my code every time I save the file. So basically, the default way of specifying the home parameter is saying home, colon, and then whatever data you're going to provide. So colon is the way that it knows that this is the data you're going to provide. So you always have to use a colon here for every parameter. So if I have, let's say, param1 colon some data, param comma param2 colon some data, param3 colon some data, each param is separated by a comma, and after the name of the param, you're going to have to use a colon and then the data that you're going to provide. So if this MaterialApp requires a home parameter, I'm going to have to give it a value, and I can't just give it any value because Dart is what's called a strongly typed language. I need to provide it a specific type of data. So as we went over in the last lesson, there's 3 main types of data in Dart. There's a string, which is a bunch of just text enclosed by single quotes. There's an integer, which is essentially a number. And there's also a Boolean, which is true or false. But in this case, home is not any one of those. It's a special data type. And we can see what data type is required for it by just floating over the home parameter. And we can see here that home needs to be a widget type. Now, a widget type is basically a class, so it needs to be of type widget. And there's many different types of widget you can use. You probably heard of them already: stateful widget, StatelessWidget, etc. So home can be either any type of widget, and typically it's a stateless widget, because the screen we're going to display for the home screen is going to not have any state. And if you don't know what state is, we're going to cover that in the next lesson, so you can not worry about it for now. But basically, this screen is going to be a stateless widget. It's not going to have any data to it. And basically, another thing about parameters here is if I provide some data here, like let's say home was a string, and I say data, comma, let's say param2 colon, comma, more data, right? This is not very realistic. When I save my file, it's going to automatically insert line breaks here and indent. So this is what you're going to see a lot with Flutter. So for every parameter, just to kind of make the data look better, look on the screen, so it's not like very long, it's going to add a line break in and indent. So instead of something long like this, let's say I have more params like this, param2, param3, etc. This is very ugly because when you're writing a lot of code, having a long list of parameters makes it not very readable. So you're going to see this a lot, which is whenever I have a lot of parameters, it's going to automatically add these line breaks and indent. So that's really important for like readability. So this makes the kind of code a lot more readable, but also whenever we nest data, so I can add let's say the param4, you're passing another class to it. You're not passing a string. Let's say the class is called another class. And if that class requires other parameters, like another param1, and then some data, let's call it an integer like this, another param2, let's say it's another integer, and let's say another param3 is a string, foobar, whatever. Also, that's going to be formatted. So it's not going to be a long list here. It's going to, when I save my file, it's going to indent again, and it's going to look like this. So this format of data is you're gonna see a lot in Flutter. So every time I nest things, and this is where I'm nesting another class inside param4, and I'm nesting param4 inside my MaterialApp. This is the kind of format you're going to see. So you're going to have to get used to that. So anyway, let's go back to actually implementing our screen, and let's finish this up. So the home is basically a widget, and basically we want to show a main screen of information. And to do that, there's a special convenience widget called Scaffold. Scaffold is what the word scaffold means just some kind of like, when they build a building, there's like construction work, people have to work on the building. There's like different levels of that they can climb on. It's just something that's temporary. And so scaffolding basically gives you the support you need to kind of create a screen. It's a convenience widget. And it's a convenience widget because it lets you customize some parameters that that are very common. And two parameters it lets you specify is a navigation bar at the top and some main body of data in the center of the screen. So most mobile apps have a nav bar at the top, as you already know, probably being a mobile app user. And so this Scaffold widget lets us specify that using a parameter called app bar. So app bar is our main navigation bar at the top. Now, app bar requires a widget of type preferred size widget. Now, that's really confusing because preferred size widget doesn't mean anything, and I'm not going to go into what it is, but basically there's a specific widget called app bar. Now, it accepts this app bar, which is essentially a navigation bar, and app bar is extending this preferred size widget, which again, you don't have to know about. So that's why it's not complaining, it's not giving me any errors. So I'm just noting this because as you look through the code, it might be confusing that, oh, it accepts a preferred size widget. What does that mean? And just know that widgets can extend other widgets. So app bar here extends or kind of uses the features of this weird preferred size widget. So that's the best explanation I can give. But basically, I would say trust the process, and you'll kind of get the hang of it. So app bar is our navigation bar, and app bar requires a parameter. Let me look at here, called title. So the text at the top of the screen, that's what we're going to display here. So the text at the top of the screen, the parameter here is called title, and then we need to provide it some text. And we can't just write in some text here because it doesn't accept that. If we float over the title param, it's requiring a widget. See, widget title here. So the way we display some text in Flutter is using a widget called text. And text, you can just pass a string to it. So now, basically, like this. Now, basically, there's no parameter to provide a kind of like a string to this widget. We can't just say the name of the parameter. Some widgets you don't specify any name for the parameter. If it's something that's a common sense parameter, instead of specifying a name of a parameter, you're not going to type in text data : hello like all the time throughout your app. There's a shortcut Flutter and Dart provide, which is basically something that's just, it expects you to provide like the parameter. So if I click into text here, you can see this. This data here you provide is the actual text that's going to display on the screen, but there's no name for this parameter. Okay, so it's a non-optional parameter and there's no name for it really. We're just going to say hello. So that's just another style in how to instantiate widgets, and it's important to note that because you might be wondering why isn't there a parameter name there. So this navigation bar is going to have a title with text hello, and then there's another parameter on Scaffold that is the final part that we have to implement, which is called body. Body is the main section of the screen. So we're going to say body colon, and we're going to also provide some text. We can typically provide whatever we want here, but we can say this is some text. Welcome to my app. So now that I save, so basically we have app bar here is the first parameter of Scaffold. Then we have a comma because remember parameters are kind of separated by commas. And then we have the body param. So that's the second parameter that's provided, and it's requiring a widget, and we're going to use the text widget here. And then each parentheses here is going to end our end it here. So ending Scaffold. So we just what I'm highlighting here is we've instantiated the Scaffold widget, and this is going to be passed to home, and then MaterialApp here. Now the final thing we have to do is we can't just run this app yet. So there's a special function in main that Flutter provides, and that's called run app. So there's this special function that whatever we pass to it is whatever is going to run when we run the app. So we're going to have to say run, you could say return, because this is going to return something. We don't really need to specify it actually. Run app, and then I'm going to give it my app. So we're going to provide it our MaterialApp, right? And as I save this file, the Flutter extension for Visual Studio Code is going to format it for me automatically. Now, we're going to break up this code into different files in a minute, but right now it looks a bit ugly because it's all deeply nested, but we're going to have to just deal with it for now. So I'm going to hit F5 and run the app. You can also go to debug and say just start debugging. The bar down here is going to be purple because it's crunching away doing something and it's running the app. So that's why the bar is down here is purple. And as you can see on the right, we have hello as our app bar, our nav bar text. And then we have, this is some text, welcome to my app. This is the beginning of the main body. And because I'm not customizing MaterialApp in any way, by default, it's going to have the style of kind of an material design. And material design is a certain kind of design library Flutter and Google offers. And they use material design for web applications, mobile apps, a lot of stuff. And it's just basically a general style of how to kind of present UI to people. So that's why you're going to have like a blue by default here at the top, and a little bit of a shadow here under the nav bar, and then some text. So we can style Flutter apps in kind of the iOS style, not the material design style, but we can also customize the material design style if we want. We don't have to have a shadow here. We can change the color of this. We can change the text size, etc. But by default, this is what it's going to look like. So now let's do the final part of the video, and we're going to split up the code into kind of something that's a lot more readable. So let's stop the app here. Okay, so let's create one file that will contain our main app. So, well, first of all, actually, let's start from the backwards. So let's create a file that contains our home screen. So this scaffold represents our home screen because we're providing this value as the home parameter here of MaterialApp. So I'm going to cut this here and say right click on lib and say new file, and I'm going to say hello. And this is going to be the hello screen basically. And basically to create a screen in Flutter, I'm not going to paste this in yet, so because it's going to be confusing. we're going to have to implement our own stateless widget. So there's two types of widgets, stateful and stateless. And basically state is data. All it is data that's associated with a widget. Stateless widgets don't really have any data to it. We're just going to display something. So I'll go over that in depth in another lesson, but basically most of the widgets you're going to be using in the beginning are stateless widgets. So to create our own stateless widget, it's going to be a class. As I said, all widgets are classes. So we're going to say class, and then we're going to name our widget. So we're going to call our widget hello. And because it's a stateless widget, Flutter already provides some code to render a stateless widget. So we're going to have to use that code, but we're going to extend that code by writing our own customization options for the screen. We're going to tell it what we want to draw on the screen. So we're going to extend stateless widget, and stateless widget is a class, and we're going to use this extends keyword here. So whenever I declare a class, I can have it extend using this extends keyword, and then say the name of the other class I want to use here. And then we're going to have curly braces here because this is where our code is going to go. And to extend the stateless widget, to implement our widget, we're going to implement a special function called build. So build is going to have a specific way to implement it. And let me just implement it quick and explain it to you. So build is a special function that we're going to implement, which requires that we return a widget. So the return value is going to be here. So if I don't have a return value, I have just nothing here. So this is what we're going to return. And what it's going to pass in is a build context. And we're not going to go over build context right now, but basically build context is something required by our stateless widget so that it can draw properly or render something properly. So we might not use this build context parameter, but we still need to provide it. And I'll again explain what that means in another lesson. And we're going to paste in what we copied here. So we're going to say scaffold, app bar, etc. And the reason why this is erroring out a lot is because we haven't imported our material.dart file. So we're going to go back to the main.dart file, copy this import, and just import it again here. So now there's no red errors. And because we're returning a widget here, we're going to have to use a keyword called return. And return basically returns whatever value we provide to it. And then because this is a statement, I have to end it with a semicolon. And because I provided everything the compiler needs and I hit save, it's going to automatically format my code for me. So it's going to remove the empty line break here. It's going to indent things properly. So basically what you're looking at is your own stateless widget. And this is a single screen in Flutter. And this override means that we're overriding an existing function that stateless widget provides to us. So if I control or command click into this stateless widget, and this is a lot of ugly code because you just don't understand what it means, but because we're just starting off, but there is a function here that it's expecting us to implement called build, right? And so that's where it is. So we're overriding it, and this @ symbol is basically called an annotation. So an annotation is something that you can provide. Let's say it could be anything, but in this case, the stateless widget is requiring an annotation called override because we're overriding something. And what it's doing is it's just basically like a label for a function. So it's basically adding a label to our function that gives it some characteristic or unlocks some functionality to it. So we can't just remove this override. We have to provide this here. So this override returns a widget, and then the function name is build, and providing a build context. You're going to see this a ton in Flutter because if you're implementing a lot of stateful or stateless widgets, you're going to be needing to override this build function a lot. Okay, so let's finish this up. So we have our hello screen. It's going to return a scaffold, which is basically a screen. And then lastly, we don't want to have a material app here. We want to move that to a separate file. So let's move that. And to move it, we're going to create our own app.dart file. And the reason, and app.dart is, it's just a convention. So let's copy our hello screen here. And because it's going to have the same structure, it's going to be a stateless widget. We're going to right click lib and create a file called app.dart. And then we're going to paste in what we've copied. We're going to rename hello to app. And then we're going to go to main and then cut this here and then go to back to app. And it's not going to return a scaffold. It's going to be the container. So it's going to return a MaterialApp. And it's going to return our home screen, our hello screen, right? Now, we can't just provide it this hello here because it doesn't know what hello is. We have to import the hello class that we defined. So to use hello in the app.dart file, we say import, and we just say hello.dart. And then semicolon. So now that we have imported it, it's not going to give us a red underline here. And then we save our file, and you see it auto-formatted it, and it's one line here because there's not a lot of text here. And now we can import app, our app widget here, into main.dart. Now, before we continue real quick, app is a convention where in Flutter where or in other web app frameworks or mobile frameworks that basically is our main container for our entire app. So if we are using this MaterialApp widget, we're going to kind of return it in our app stateless widget. So app is a common file you want to create for any Flutter project, right? So whenever I create a Flutter project, I'm going to have a main.dart. I'm going to have an app.dart, which contains our MaterialApp widget, and whatever screens I want to show to the user. So right now we only have one screen, hello.dart. So we're going to go back to main, and we're going to say import app.dart. And then because it's going to run an app, we're going to say app, and we don't need to provide it any parameters. We're just instantiating the app class, and we covered what instantiating means in the last video, and we're going to provide whatever this is to run app. Now, this is a shortcut, so we could say this, right? So final app, which is the name of our variable, equals app, semicolon, and then provide that variable to it. But basically, instead of doing this, if we just say app, this is a shortcut. So this is really useful. This is just the shortcut here. So I'm going to hit F5 and we're going to run this thing. So let's see if that worked. It's going to build the app and load it up. And there we go. The app works fine still. So before we wrap up here, we're done. I'm just going to walk through exactly what we did and what's going on here. We have our main function here that Flutter looks for when it starts running. There's a special function called run app provided by just the Flutter SDK, and we import that here. And we're going to instantiate our own app, which is, again, the wrapper for our entire app that we're going to write. And what app does is it's a stateless widget, and it's going to return a MaterialApp, right? It's going to have a default screen called home, and home is something that MaterialApp expects us to provide. It's the starter screen that displays whenever the app starts. And we're going to provide it a screen to show to the user called hello. And hello is another stateless widget. It's going to return a scaffold. And again, a scaffold is a kind of boilerplate convenience widget that lets us specify an app bar, which is the nav bar at the top here, and a body, which is the main bit of content you see here. So that's it. So anytime you create a new Flutter app, you're going to be wanting to create main.dart, app.dart, and it's going to look exactly like this. And then whatever starter screen, you can name it hello.dart for our example, but if it's your own custom app, you're going to name it something differently. So thanks for watching.